Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's XTalks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Accelerating Clinical Development Through Design, Diversity, and Digitalization in Oncology and Beyond. My name is Ryan Muse and I'll be your XTalks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using the same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Fortrea, who developed the content for this presentation. Fortrea is a leading global provider of clinical development and patient access solutions to the life sciences industry. They partner with emerging and large biopharmaceutical, medical device, and diagnostic companies to drive healthcare innovation that accelerates life-changing therapies to patients in need. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's event. Dr. Jeffrey Cannon is an executive medical director in the oncology therapeutic area, head of the Americas Oncology team, and lead for the Patient Oncology Medical Science Leadership Center. Dr. Cannon also provides medical and scientific governance to sponsors, supporting development and execution of oncology clinical trials. But now, without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and hand the presentation over to our moderator. Dr. Jeffrey Cannon, you may begin when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan, very much. And welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And a pleasure as well to be joined by some of my colleagues who are just leaders in their field. And so I think before we get too far into it, I'd like to actually have a chance for everybody to introduce themselves. So I am, as I said, Jeffrey Cannon. I am, as Ryan introduced me, as head of the Americas Oncology team. So I oversee a team of physicians who are all oncologists within the Americas region who work as part of a global team of oncology physicians providing scientific and medical expertise to our clients. And so it's my pleasure to be here with you. And I'm joined first by my colleague, Brian.
Good morning, I'm Brian Dolan. I'm the Vice President of Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning. And I have joined Fortrea to advance our capabilities in the AI space. I think it's Alicia next, right?
Yes, thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Alicia Baker McDowell. I'm the head of Regulatory Strategy and Product Development Consulting here at Fortrea, and I am leading a work stream on diversity plans and diversity in clinical trials.
And hi, everybody. My name is Melissa. I'm Melissa Harris. I am head of global patient recruitment engagement here at Fortrea. It's my job, my responsibility to make sure that we take those fantastic plans and reg strategy from Alicia's team and really put it into action and make sure that we put our patients in the heart of everything we do, because we know at the end of the day, they are our most important people. So lovely to be with you today. Ryan.
Thank you. Ryan Kirby, Associate Director with our Digital Health and Innovation team. I support our strategic partnerships and strategic initiatives in all things digital health. So thank you. Happy to be here today.
Thank you, everyone. I'm actually going to pass it back to Ryan. We have a little question for the audience.
Yes, thank you. So appearing on everyone's screen right now is a polling question. And so before we continue to hear from our speakers, we'd like to hear a little from our audience. So you can participate in this question by selecting on any of the answers that you see in front of you and then clicking submit. The question that we're asking is, which of these presents the greatest challenge to your own work in clinical trials? Your answer options are developing or implementing diversity plans, patient recruitment, incorporating digital health and patient-centric services, understanding how to incorporate AI technologies, or finding the right patients versus overall recruitment. Give everyone some time to consider your answer and select one and participate in this poll, and then we'll continue to hear from our wonderful speakers. Right now, though, the question we're asking is, which of these presents the greatest challenge to your own work in clinical trials? Looks like we have most of our answers in, so thank you everyone for participating in this. Let's take a look at where your results have come in. We have ourselves 33% of you selecting for patient recruitment, 20% for incorporating digital health, 27% for understanding how to incorporate AI, and 20% for finding the right patients. None of you are selecting your developing or implementing diversity plans. So thanks again for your participation. I'll hand it back to our speakers.
All right, thank you everyone for that. And so we are in fact going to be talking about all of these issues. So as an oncologist, I get to see all manner of technology come through to try to help our patients. And I was thinking about this phrase that every generation sees rapid change in their time, but in the clinical trial industry, it's every week brings a rapid change in clinical trial design and technology. And so the question is, how can we effectively use those things? And so we get to sit here at Fortrea at the cusp of innovation and patient care. And so the question for today is, how can we really bring all of those technologies, all of our expertise to bear to benefit patients on behalf of our sponsors, to make it beneficial for everybody involved, but ultimately to help these patients for whom they are desperately searching for our help. So we get to advise clients on taking their mechanism of action, thinking about how it relates to a drug, who the right patients are, where in the treatment armamentarium their particular product fits, and how we can use these technologies in the real world. And so the question really comes down to, who is the right patient, which is the right trial for them, what is the right time to get them onto that trial, and then ultimately bringing drugs to market and hope to patients. But there's a lot to unpack in all of that, and how do we actually do that? How do we understand all of those issues in terms of designing the trial, understanding what diversity means, understanding how the digital world in which we live and in which we are going to will help us to do that, to bring these drugs to patients. And so I wanted to start off the conversation first talking about some of those patient characteristics. Who is the right patient? How do we know who the right patient is and where they are? So Alicia, I wanted to ask you first a little bit about, we talk about diversity in the terms of clinical trials, and wanted to get your thoughts a little bit about what that means really. And in fact, this is important to us because our colleague Melissa, who you'll hear from in a minute, actually was part of a large group of Fortrea authors that actually published on this very recently. So it's something that we think about on a daily basis. So Alicia, help us understand what diversity really is.
Sure, thanks, Jeff. So, diversity in clinical trials is really making sure that your study population mimics the target population in the real world. So we know that particularly in the US, we have a very diverse ethnic and racial population, and we know that people of different races and ethnicities react differently to certain medical products. So ultimately, we want to safely and accurately label the product for all people that will be taking the drug, and we want our clinical trial population to mimic the real world population that will ultimately be using the product. So the inclusion of underrepresented racial and ethnic populations in the US is key to better understanding that. And the FDA now has authority to require and enforce diversity in clinical trials through the requirement of a diversity action plan. So,
thank you, Alicia.
Slide,
so,
yeah.
Yeah. So one of the other questions then is how do we support writing those plans?
Sure. So I can talk a little bit about how we support writing the plans, but I first wanted to approach how we are looking at it holistically. So as a CRO, we're thinking of it from start to finish, really with looking at the prevalence of the disease, and that has its own challenges, and we've done quite a few plans at this point. We're learning the limitations to the various available data sets, particularly in oncology. When you start looking at specific biomarkers and genetic mutations, there are limitations to the data set, and really you want to look for that accurate prevalence and incidence rate that will go into setting your diversity goals. So that's the first piece, is that consulting aspect. that we talk through with our clients, and then writing each section. And we work closely with our operations teams. It's a little different than other regulatory documents we've historically put together, but we work hand in hand with our operations colleagues to make sure we're identifying the barriers and limitations to attracting, recruiting, and retaining all patients to bring into the trial. So knowing them up front and then being able to operationalize, which I know my colleagues will talk about later on, is critical. So it's really that upfront piece. We see a lot of enforcement in the oncology space, so there's a lot of activity, a lot of examples that we've seen. It's really looking at that real world population and being able to accurately look at the breakdown of the racial and ethnicity, the racial and ethnic breakdown within that target patient population to accurately set your diversity goals. That's our initial approach to writing the plan.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about how that helps with the whole regulatory process once we have the plan in place? How do sponsors get the benefit of that in terms of presenting the whole development plan to regulators?
Sure. So it's a living document. So it is not something that will be set in stone. You can go back and revise it and renegotiate and discuss it as things are on, as studies are ongoing. Transparency, I always think, is best with the regulators. As I've mentioned, we've seen a lot of enforcement in the oncology space. We're still in this grace period with requirement of the diversity plan. That said, we're seeing requests for diversity plans many times in the oncology divisions, and enforcement post-approval with post-approval study requirements if you are not having an accurately diverse population within your trial. So we're definitely seeing that activity. And just, it's transparency. It helps to bring this up. FDA's requested to bring these up in milestone meetings and have discussions around the plan. And I think that there's hesitation with setting goals because you don't want to set yourself up for failure, but at the same time, you need to incorporate this aspect, be transparent about it, and show the activity and the action you're doing to achieve those goals. They can be realistic and they can be reasonable in the discussion.
Absolutely, thank you. And you know, in fact, when treating patients, I mean, this is something that oncologists do think about. How do you offer trials? And I'm going to use the word equitably to patients, and part of that I think does actually come from the sponsor and from us, and how we even design the trial. So Alicia, we'll hope to hear from you a little bit later as well. But I also wanted to turn to my colleague Melissa, and I mentioned the word equity. So Melissa, maybe you can talk a little bit, and this is on the topic about diversity leading to finding the right patient for the trial, and understanding how the trial itself can represent the people that actually need the therapy. And so Melissa, I wanted to pass to you a little bit to talk about how do you view equity in oncology?
Absolutely, thank you, Jeff. And I was actually not surprised to see recruitment as the leading poll difficulty, and because, you know, across the industry we're all seeing the same thing. But why is it important? Well, you know, you can put it into these 4 brackets really, other than it's the right thing to do. First and foremost, it really just is the right thing to do. But we need to go through, we need to optimize health equity, making sure that no matter where you're from, who you are, you have to be able to consider clinical research as a trial option, especially in oncology. You know, we need to change the trends. We need to change this inequality trend. I don't want to be talking about this in another year or 2. You know, I want to be making sure that anyone who goes on to a clinical trial comes out better, you know, and that might mean a more dignified death. But it does mean that no matter who goes on to a trial, they are not facing inequality. And they are actually representative of the patients from epidemiology, to your point earlier, and also to Alicia's. Most importantly, gold standard science, we have to make sure that the people who take the drugs are safe, and the drug is efficacious, and that we can actually improve the validity, sorry, I can't say that, of trial outcomes by making sure, especially with oncology, when we have the biomarker studies all the way from phase 1 and up, to ensure that we have better trial outcomes and our science is absolutely spot on as we move forward through the phases. Representative results, we all know, we've talked about this so much, we don't want to be having to go to post-marketing studies because potentially the patient mix is wrong. We want to make sure, and I call this ethical sustainability. We talk a lot about the sustainability of research from an environmental perspective. What about waiting, patients waiting for drugs, which could be life-changing? And I think of that as more ethical sustainability. And then beyond ethnicity and race as well, not only in the US, but also globally. Now we have the new FDA guidance on capturing social determinants of health and how we do that. Very important when you can see a 40% efficacy difference between somebody who may be living in an affluent area near a site or near a hospital versus someone who's maybe a lower socioeconomic group, a more rural. We don't want that to be skewing our study results. And also including, and as I said, sustainable trial design, literally driving better care for all of our patients. And this is why equity is so important all the way across the board.
Yeah, that's front and center again in actually the physicians who want to treat their patients, because we see that these discrepancies that you've mentioned in not only who is there, but what happens to them, how they react, how patients themselves react to the trials that we're offering to them. And so as we think about, you know, moving from talking about diversity and understanding what it means and what equity means, Melissa, talk to us maybe a little bit about how we actually find those patients.
Sure. So I think the way that we move and the way that we start moving from talking about it to actually doing it largely lays in community engagement. We can see a disengagement between researchers and participants. We know that, that's from our research. We want to bridge that gap. We need to make sure that we continue with our community involvement, not only from a recruitment perspective, but our planning, our implementing. We need to make sure we're co-creating, creating community advisory boards, ensuring that we bring in our patient advocates and our navigators. I was lucky enough just to spend 2 days at Patients as Partners and really seeing the community and the patient advocates being so brave, outspoken, thankfully, and really knowing what they want with regard to patient, clinical trial participation. We make sure that we are actually going into the community now and culturally and linguistically being sensitive. We need to be working through our trusted voices. This is our patient advocates and our community leaders. You can't just walk into a community and suddenly expect to recruit patients. You need to be doing that work, that strong work with our community congregations, building trust, building the awareness about the importance of clinical research and fostering that transparency before we move on to things like increased funding for community engaged approaches, increasing collaboration when you come to working with awareness days. We could be having community outreach budgets for sites, because let's face it, if the sites are going to be working hard, it costs money. You know, we need to be giving them the time to be recruiting staff who are representative of the patient populations that we have mandated within our plan, but also the budget to do that. Other ways that we've done it, just-in-time sites. Just-in-time sites are a fantastic way of recruiting patients in the community where their trust already exists. So leveraging that JIT model so that when a patient is identified, they're actually being treated in the environment that they went to in the first place, and then, of course, being a lot more trusting. And once we've done this work, once we're in the community and we're working with our patient navigators and our local enrollment specialists, working out for that particular patient population, be that cancer or otherwise, where do these patients want to learn about the study? Is it through health days? Is it through online digital tools? But also making sure that we're respectful in our terminology, we're culturally sensitive, and we're just creating this very warm and involving environment. And I go back to what I said earlier about co-creating. It's so important that we co-create our recruitment, our trial design, all the way from preclinical, you know, all the way up to getting our PED data, our patient experience data, and then funneling that back through the successful recruitment.
So I'm thinking, especially in terms of, you know, the patients come to sites because they have, in our case, because they have cancer, and that's how they come to medical care. But what you're actually talking about, I think, is more holistic than that. It's not just sort of waiting for somebody to walk in the door, right? It's for being proactive and understanding where the trials that we have to offer fit into who the patients are. Is that a correct understanding, Melissa?
Absolutely, yeah. We need to be doing the groundwork first. As I say, you can't walk into a community and just expect it. You can't build it and expect people to come. You know, you have to do that community engagement work. And we're overturning years and years of patients who maybe would not be apt to going onto a clinical trial. Maybe they're fearful of a medical environment. Maybe they're a member of the LGBT community and feeling very marginalized when it comes to which box do they tick on the ICF. So we have to have very much a holistic view and very supportive view and a very collaborative. And I go back to what I said at the beginning, patient advocates and patient community partners are the cornerstone of successful patient recruitment when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
And it's as simple, really. I mean, it's simple to say, but it is true that even when you say to a patient, would you be willing, or would your child be willing to participate in a study? The word that you use is important, and this really takes into account what diversity means, because diversity is not just racial or gender diversity. It's also patients' familiarity with clinical trials in general. Yep. And so, as Melissa mentioned, having the groundwork already done within a community to help understand what is a clinical trial. And again, sounds silly to say, but it's not that we're experimenting on your child. It's that we're offering a potentially life-saving treatment. But it's important to say that. It's important for physicians to understand that. I think it's also important for sponsors to understand that the reception of people, of patients, actual patients with a life-threatening disease, their expectations may not be our expectations sometimes, and we have to be able to meet them somewhere in the middle.
Exactly, and I can give you an example of that as well. I worked with a patient who had a cancer diagnosis, and she was in with her husband in the waiting room, and then she went in to see the physician, and he was using the word tumour throughout her consultation, and she was probably in there for a good half an hour, and when she walked out, she said to her husband, "Did he just say I had cancer?" Because he hadn't used the word. And we have to be very mindful that we are in a medical environment and we use these words every single day. And 1 in 10 of us is neurodivergent. And therefore, the materials that we're putting out, you have to give them multi abilities. Do you need audio? Do you need written? Do you need video? How do you need it? But actually using the words that the patients use, not the words that we use.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and Jeff, if I can add there with Melissa, because I think it feeds into things from a digital perspective too. But I know, Melissa, we've also talked about the feedback that we heard from patients in terms of, creating that feedback loop in terms of, asking people to participate in a clinical trial that may not be familiar with them. They want to know what impact they are also having. You talked about it from kind of a community and more of a holistic approach. What impact is their participation in a trial having? So providing that information on the back end in terms of this is where you're helping out, or this is what impact you are making, I think is another important piece to that.
It absolutely is, Ryan. As human nature is what's in it for me. But also, people like to be told thank you. And patients can feel very abandoned at the end of a trial, and a simple thank you can solve that. Okay.
So thanks. Yeah, I know, Melissa, you also wanted to talk a little bit more just about sort of holistically how we look at involving everybody and how we can help sponsors and patients sort of put it all together.
Absolutely. And I'm experiencing typical British weather, by the way, so if you can hear the rain, I do apologise. So I can put this into 6 easy categories. How do we get the right patients on the trial? Well, as you can see on the screen, we've talked about taking our community approach and our data. And I know that Brian and Ryan are going to be talking about data and AI and also digital tools. And I think it's not making sure you're restrictive on your eligibility criteria, reducing those regulatory barriers that we spoke about. We need to ensure we improve accessibility. So where does the patient live? Do they need lodging? Are they too scared to walk in on their own? All of these things. We need to break down the language barriers. In the US, we produce materials in English and Spanish. And yet in the state of New York, you have 218 languages spoken. So what can we be doing better there? Looking at low health literacy, simplifying documents. I talked just then about the patient wondering if she had cancer because they didn't use the word. And also really overcoming the mistrust and the fear of exploitation through working with our communities. And if you put all those six tactics together, you recruit the right patients for the trials.
Very good. Excellent discussion so far. So I think we wanted to ask the audience another question at this point.
Yes, so appearing on everyone's screen in a moment is going to be another polling question. What we're asking this time is, which of these do you think will have the biggest impact on clinical trials in the next 5 years? Please take a moment to consider your answer. Select one of them that you see in front of you and click Submit to participate. The answer options here are drug administration at home, wearables for trial design data collection, mobile device for patient use, scheduling, ePro input, things like that, AI driving drug design and clinical trial optimizations, and increased use of patients in emerging markets, for example, LATAM. Again, the question is, which of these do you think will have the biggest impact on clinical trials within the next 5 years? Give everyone a few more seconds to consider their answer, and then we'll continue with our speakers. All right, looks like most of you have submitted your answer, so thanks very much for participating. Let's look at your results for this one. We have 56% of you selecting that AI driving drug design and clinical trial operations, 22% for increased use of patients in emerging markets, 17% for mobile device for patient use, and 6% of you selecting wearables for trial data collection, and no one selecting drug administration at home. So thanks again for participating. I'll hand it back to our speakers.
Thank you, everyone, for that. That is actually really fascinating results, truly, because I think it really feeds into what we hope to discuss in the next few minutes. And so the topic which the poll, the audience has correctly identified is, so we've talked about diversity, we've talked about equity, we've talked about finding the right patients from a perspective of how we understand where sponsors need their product to be and where patients need the therapy to be, and where physicians in the middle sort of understand how to get that right drug to the right patient, as we said many times before. But so the next question is for my colleague Brian, which is to ask you, once we've talked about all these concepts, right, and then the audience has already identified that that we live in a world where we actually have some pretty neat tools to help us understand these concepts in maybe a different way than we did before. So I wonder if you could tell us what is Fortrea's plan to use innovation. How do we bridge all of those things together?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously the topic that's on a lot of people's minds. I noticed the first poll was, what is going to be one of the biggest drivers? And people said artificial intelligence and tech. And then this next poll, AI using drug design was the big responder there. And frankly, that's interesting to me because that's my line of business. Obviously, I've been building AI products for about 30 years now. One of the things I teach a class on innovation, and the students are always, especially this year, have been very, very interested in the AI space. And one of the things I like to remind people is that AI is a technology and not a product. A product closes a gap in a user experience that makes your day better, whereas a technology will make a product faster. And Fortrea has really adopted that mentality around how do we use our technology, how do we use AI in order to build better products that can accelerate the whole drug discovery process, can make patient experience better. And that is being encapsulated in our overall IT strategy of using innovation to drive us forward into the future, drive clinical trials forward into the future. Our CIO, Alejandro Martinez, likes to remind us that we were born digital. We have this unique advantage in that we have a new platform we get to build. We can start from scratch and we can build it in a completely modern fashion. I almost said the right way, but that's so biased. And frankly, the right way has changed over my decades as a technologist. But we're really very interested in making sure that we're keeping up to date on how the world is moving from a technology perspective, but maintaining a product mindset, maintaining a backwards from the problem mindset. So that when we're looking at what are the challenges our CRAs are facing, we're backing up from there. What are the problems our investigators are facing, we're backing up from there. And not doing technology for technology's sake, which is sort of the sexy way to go in technology. It's like, oh, this is cool, this is neat. So one of the things, and I'm going to talk to this slide in a moment, but one of the things that I'm trying to encourage everybody to think about is not, how do we use AI? How do we use AI? Where is AI going to fit into this? How are we going to build an AI product? What is our AI response? That to me is a little bit like saying, how are we going to use electricity? It's everywhere. AI is going to be everywhere in every product we do, in every work effort we have, to the extent that it's needed. So we're backing off from the language of this is our AI strategy, and we're thinking more towards our product strategy supported by our technology, of which includes a large swath of AI. I like to remind my colleagues, we kind of have to get over how cool AI is right now. I have a cell phone. I'm 55 years old. I have a cell phone, and it's amazing to me that I can talk to anybody on the planet and take pictures and video chat because I grew up with rotary phones. But our kids, not so impressed. My kids, not so impressed. My 15-year-olds are just accepting that technology. And I need to think more like them, first of all, because I love them. And secondly, because they are the future and they need to be looking at the technology is how it's useful to them. So they have already adopted a product mindset around artificial intelligence. And we at Fortrea, even though, some of us are 55-year-old white guys, are trying to adopt that mindset as well and just think about where are we now and where do we need to go rather than isn't it cool how far we've come. So looking at this slide, one of our strategy really is to try to use this innovation. One of the things that is the modern tech, and I won't go on too long, I'm sorry, but one of the things that we want to think about in a modern context is intuitive design. It needs to be easy to use, because if it's not easy to use, then we're creating yet another barrier to our investigators, our patients, our sponsors. We want this in an integrated environment. People are so used to the cloud now. It's amazing how many legacy systems still exist out there where people have to click into this website and that website and this website and go through and copy and paste and download to Excel and upload to some other site. We want to automate what we can because that's what machines are for. That's what we've done in every other industry, and machines are here to make automation happen so that people can live an easier life. We want to use the intelligence we have in terms of our institutional knowledge, not just what we can derive from the data, which is really important, but also what do our experts within the company already know? We have some amazing talent and some amazingly educated people who know this industry very, very well. How do we capture that? One of the things that it's distressing to me about the current AI landscape is that the large language models and what we're seeing there have gone out and read the entire internet in an effort to replicate an average response from the internet. You can ask ChatGPT whatever you want and it will give you an average response, sort of the average man response. Whereas artificial intelligence and analytics used to be about providing you with the best response. We wanted to mimic the behavior and answer of our smartest people. And now a lot of the AI with the normative models are replicating the answer of the average person. We want to get beyond that and make sure that we're capturing the expertise that we have and also leveraging these very broad normative models. And then of course, all of this has to build towards our future because this moment, what we're experiencing, is a very exciting moment for us at Fortrea right now, where we're creating a whole innovation bubble right now. Lots of new things are coming, lots of new things are happening, but that has to be the norm. We have to remember that there will be more innovations in the future, and we're going to be surprised. We could think of lots of pieces of technology that are maybe 3 months out, a year out, 5 years out. Like we could already see these things on the horizon. How do we be ready so that when those things arrive, or be surprised? For instance, everybody was surprised by large language models. how do we sort of quickly adapt to that? And so this whole stack around the design, integrated environment, automation and data-driven insights, or just intelligence, needs to be built in such a fashion that we can adapt and change as the trial environment changes, or as the trial itself changes. And that's a really important part of our mindset. So I think that's sort of the overall philosophy of how we want to go forward with ourselves as a company, building products, building experiences within the trial milieu that allow us to be adaptive and responsive, and not distract with technology. I think that was the big failure of the EHRs, is that they've created an environment where people are looking at their screens rather than looking at others. And our internal slides all say, we're using AI and technology to eliminate toil and maximize eye contact. It's very important to us. One of the we had this question that just came up, around what is going to impact trials, and a lot of it was about remote interactions with parts of the world we haven't yet penetrated, or doing trials at home. That means that we need to maintain that human connection. And when we're fascinated by our own technology and the sort of blinking lights, we're avoiding that. And that is not why we're doing this at all. We think about, why do we do this? We do this to improve human health, and improving human health is about a human-to-human connection. Why do I want to improve human health? When my kids were very young and I fed them, it was satisfying to just see them eat, because I felt like I was doing something for another human. And then we'd have other kids over and we'd feed them, and just watching them eat was satisfying as a human-to-human interaction. And I feel like there's a big distraction towards, can we put technology in there? Can I put a vending machine in my house so that my kids could just punch out a pizza whenever they want to? I don't want to live in that world. Fortrea doesn't want to live in that world. The employees of Fortrea don't want to live in that world. And we don't want our patients to have to live in that world. So how can we push forward in innovation, making technology just disappear into the sidelines and allow them to have intimate contact with their providers in a time when they're terrified, right? People join clinical trials mostly because they're terrified, mostly because they're worried about their health. So that is the most crucial time to make sure the technology disappears and the provider becomes the focus, and that patient interaction becomes the focus. That's how we are attempting to sort of drive our company forward, and that's our entire tech team's approach to how we're going to use technology.
Thanks, Brian. And I do appreciate the analogy of, it's not cool anymore. What else is there, and how do we make that, how do we put that in front of our patients? And I think one of the things, especially so far, we spoke very eloquently about how this affects the patient's lives, and that's really why we're doing this. If we also want to consider what the benefits are, I think, to the sponsor and to the sites. And so I think you may have a use case that you wanted to quickly talk about, and how we can do this.
Yeah, this is an example of us trying to back up from the problem. And this is no promises to the world, but we all have, when I say we all, I mean everybody has sort of a vision what the future looks like. And there are things I think that are pretty common when people talk about our interactions with technology in the future. And that a lot of people use, science fiction writers use, and the movies use. People talk about, in the future we'll have flying cars. It's one of those things that people talk about a lot, whether or not we'll get to there. But our imagination of the future includes sort of touchless and passive use of technology, so that when you're a CRA, for instance, and you're visiting a site, that data sort of transfers easily. We can ask questions of the data very, very easily, maybe in natural language, maybe simply by scanning the refrigerator to see if it's been inspected. Very, very simple ways to sort of interact with the environment digitally while maintaining this interaction with the people, the investigators on site. So this story here, and I'm not going to go through it, it is an assembly of different capabilities that we've developed on the back end that are kind of like our Lego bricks. We have this ability now, we have that ability now, we're assembling them into various products, but all of that in service of our CRA in this particular instance, having sort of a seamless experience, having the toil eliminated from her day. She doesn't have to sit down and write out 15 pages of a visit report. She writes the essential parts, and she uses the other parts of technology in order to make it easier for her. She doesn't have to hand copy things from one thing to another, or type it in here and then type it in there. she uses technology in order to make that happen, so that while she's on site, she's not wasting that time going over spreadsheets or going over handwritten documents. She can have a conversation about what's the content and the data within those documents. So this is just one, again, one assemblance of that. We have about 12 technologies or 12 capabilities we were able to put together in the last 5 or 6 months. We're pretty rapid shop. That's one of the fun things. I was a little amazed when I joined Fortrea at how fast we can go in some instances and slow in others. But I mean, in our technology innovation, we're pretty quick. And how can we put those together into an experience? So this is just one. But one of the questions that came up at the top was, how can we use AI in trials? And I can't wait to talk to our sponsors about that, about what they're seeing. We've already talked to several sponsors, the audience as well. It's interesting to us because we feel like this is how we're going to electrify the world. This is how we're going to move forward, is using these advanced capabilities. And what are these use cases? Our CRAs are seeing these kinds of toil. What are the things that your CRAs or your employees or the sponsors, your sponsors are seeing? So that's part of the fun of working here, is that we have this ability now, because we were born digital, to move very, very quickly and think through problems and go, what do we have on the shelf? What can we make right now? So it's a pretty inspiring place to work.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Thank you, Brian. So let's move from what the capabilities are to what some of the things we are still doing. Again, bridging that gap between what the sponsor needs and what the patient needs. And so part of artificial intelligence, part of diversity, part of equity, all comes back to how we can actually help the patient. And so I wanted to introduce my colleague Brian now to talk a little bit about how we're thinking about digital health in patients. So what are some of the issues that we have and opportunities that we have?
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. So Brian, man, you stole some thunder there, but that's okay. Like Jeff said, I mean, digital is kind of the umbrella to all these pieces. But just from an industry standpoint, these are some of the key challenge areas that we identified. And because, Brian just mentioned this, I'm actually I'll start with that last or the bottom block there on the left. But when we talk about lack of technology and innovation, certainly this doesn't mean that there's not innovation happening. Clearly there is, but it's moving beyond kind of the tech for tech's sake, and ensuring that we are looking at the technologies and usability that would be specific to uses in clinical trials. And so he talked about some of the things with AI around the automation and predictive capabilities. And so I think we're starting to see those emerge and hopefully eliminate one of these challenges. But I think in general, one of the biggest issues with implementing any sort of technology or digital innovation is how do we communicate, that value of implementing this tech? What does that return on investment look like? And I think historically, we've had some challenges with communicating that, whether that's because there's been a lack of data to back it up, or just simply because it was new, a few years ago. But now we're starting to see some things released, some publications. There was the Tufts Impact Report that came out a while back that based ROIs on key performance indicators when digital tech was involved in trials. Specifically, biggest returns being around those phase 2, phase 3 studies. So we're starting to see kind of the proof in the pudding, so to speak. Other key challenge areas, and again, I think all of our speakers have kind of already hit on this because we're talking about this in the sense of an ecosystem. But that creating that proper stakeholder ecosystem that involves all those in the clinical space. And so not only, is this looking at it from a technology standpoint, but really it's understanding and getting that feedback and what the needs are of the various stakeholders. And then lastly here on this slide, talking about it from a data standpoint, really, so now we have a whole host of multimodal data coming in supporting these trials. So, how do we create systems that are able to integrate and bring in the data from different areas and really bring value to what we are collecting?
Thanks. Thanks, Ryan. And also, I know that we talk about how we can get feedback from the sites using all of these technologies that you mentioned.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the key things I think, is maybe it's an industry-wide lesson learned. Maybe it's just internal to Fortrea, but I think one of the things we got right early on, in how we looked at design and deploying technologies was, we said we want to focus on it, be very patient-centric, and we want to make it easy for patients, and that still holds true. But then we didn't really think about, how's this impacting sites and the complexity that it brings to the sites. And so one of the areas that we've decided to kind of focus on is this unified ecosystem. Again, looking at the feedback from those stakeholders and specifically at the sites. When we collected this site feedback, we realized we were making things a lot more difficult, and they didn't want to use some of this technology because it was difficult on them, whether that was inexperience with the technology, whether that was limited staff. But focusing on things that bring a single sign-on or improved training. And things like that, all within a single platform to simplify this for those sites and those other users is really an area that we have focused on. And for us, what we are looking at is, creating those partnerships across the industry for those best fit solutions to create this unified experience.
Thanks. And then thinking also just in sort of general about how all of this sort of fits together, right? And what's our vision at Fortrea, if you want to comment, Ryan, on how all of this comes together?
Yeah, and so we've, again, talked about some of this already, but creating that empathetic study design is a real area of focus, and of course, it's an area of focus across the industry. But incorporating that stakeholder feedback to improve that trial experience. So whether that's through voice of the patient feedback or collection of sending out surveys to oncologists as well as patients to really understand what is the biggest impact for them when we talk about technology and implementing that on a clinical trial. So taking that into consideration and feeding that into the study design. And then we just talked about kind of removing the complexities and frictions. So this is that delivery of digital solutions and really streamlining it, whether that is from a access standpoint and overall usability, and then kind of like Brian mentioned from a functionality standpoint. So again, at Fortrea, we're partnering with industry leaders to provide this integrated solution. And that is an area of focus for us. And then, nothing new here with kind of creating this flexible global delivery, but I think it goes beyond the understanding of, what the global regulatory requirements are. But again, looking at, as Melissa said, kind of partnering and looking at it more holistically, where can we, as all of us, as leaders in the industry, where can we have the greatest impact and discussion, from a regulatory standpoint, whether that is providing feedback on released guidance, or even at a greater level, how can we influence policy that makes it easier to deploy digital solutions like wearables and things like that, so that we can collect better data in that real world data, which is an area there that I mentioned on the right hand side. But also including here, optimizing that access to clinical trials. So again, we've touched on this quite a bit, but I think one of the key challenges that we haven't mentioned when we talk about equitable deployment in trials is how do we overcome kind of that digital divide, right? So for those underserved populations or underrepresented populations, when we think about deploying this technology, we really have to consider, are we still creating a divide because there's a disparity in either access to connectivity, familiarity with technology? So including, how are we going to account for removing this is, again, something that is part of our design and implementation thinking, is part of what we are considering. And then quickly here, so I want to make sure we have time to leave for any questions, but, I think we're seeing an increase in real world data collection. And as data is collected digitally through things like wearables, electronic health records, we continue to see things like ePro, eCOA as a main source of data. But when we think about all this data coming in, I think there's some challenges that we have to consider in terms of are we collecting the right data, especially when we look at it from endpoints. How are we collecting it, and is it really useful for the study? So the real world data collection and overall quality data is a significant consideration when we talk about deploying these types of digital technologies. But I think it is an area that we'll see more and more increase in, especially the real world data collection as we move forward, and there's the enhancements from a machine learning and AI standpoint. So I kind of breezed through that in last piece quickly, but noting there that our time, I want to ensure that we give optimal time for any further discussion or questions.
Great, thank you, Ryan. And so that does actually bring us to very close to the top of the hour, and I want to thank my colleagues for a fascinating discussion. There's so much work to do, and I hope that everybody in the audience especially gets the principal theme, which is that we're doing this for the patients, and that all of us are driven to that one goal, that we're trying to bring innovative therapies to patients. And so so in the time left, I did see one question that I think is particularly intriguing, because we talked about equity, we talked about diversity, we talked about technology, and Brian reminded us that we're old because our kids think that cell phones are not new. So the question is, especially, cancer is typically seen as a disease of the elderly, and so a lot of sites see elderly patients. And how do we talk to our older patients? Is that an issue? I know that my parents are probably more facile with the cell phone than I am, but when you're talking about certain things, so how do you bridge that generational divide? And so I'll open it up to the panel to comment on that.
I do have a thought on that. Sorry. I think that one of the things that we've neglected in our rush to sort of digitize things is how people learn. And I think Melissa pointed out that 1 out of 10 are neurodivergent. People learn things in different ways, and different generations learn things in different ways. One of the things that I would really like to see us do is be able to meet people on their own sort of learning ability. And older generations are more interested, myself included, are more interested in talking to a person one-on-one, which is actually being inhibited by our current technology stack. So the notion of sort of making the technology disappear to the side so we can have a conversation with somebody directly about their condition and about their particular path is really important to me personally, and really important to, I think, Fortrea as a technology organization. So that's all I have to say on that.
I agree with Brian. It has to be multimodal, and you have to let people decide. My 82-year-old mother quite likes reading documents that I send her, or articles about her health or whatever. But then my 17-year-old, who is neurodivergent, would much prefer to watch a video. But then when we interviewed a lot with multiple age groups, the answer comes back the same every single time. To Brian's point, meet us where we want to learn. So give the choice, provide the printed documentation, provide the digital, the audio, and sometimes both at the same time. Somebody with a neurodivergent, such as dyslexia, might want to listen and read at the same time to increase uptake of information. Let that happen.
Yeah, Melissa, and I'll just add, I think it comes down to, not only appropriate design and flexibility in that design, but in terms of how we're writing that protocol to enable and give that optionality in terms of how we are delivering, certain aspects of a study.
Absolutely, giving the opportunity for feedback, patient experience data, letting the patient have their say, and also saying thank you. As I said earlier, the most important thing, sometimes patients just don't get a thank you, and actually that's terrible. And we should always make sure that we say thank you.
I know that there are other questions, and as Ryan said at the top of the presentation, we would love to be able to answer them on the website, and stay in communication with everyone. And so with that, I again will thank my colleagues, and thank you, the audience, very much for your time and attention. And I'll pass it back to Ryan.
Well, thank you all very much for this very insightful discussion today. We have reached the end of our webinar, but for those interested in hearing more from Fortrea, you can register for the next webinar, Advancing CGT Trial Ecosystems in the Asia Pacific region, scheduled for Tuesday, May 28th, 2024, and you can do so using the link that I'm sending in the chat box. Now, if we couldn't attend to your questions, know that the team at Fortrea will follow up with you, or if you have some further questions, you can direct them to the email addresses that are up on the screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it helps us to improve our webinars. Additionally, I've shared a link to view the recording of today's event in the chat box, which you can also share with your colleagues so they may register for the recording here as well. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.